Resume recording. All right, everybody, welcome to the third and final session of our Community Scholars Program. Thank you all for being here again, because I know it's a lot of time. So I appreciate your dedicating your time to this. Let's go ahead and do, I think we're a lot of returning faces, but just in case, let's go ahead and do introductions again, just to refresh each other. So whichever end you'd like to start.
Okay. Who wants to start with introductions? You want this end or that end? You want to go there?
Judy Brown, Cherokee Village, 30 years, Art History Association, ACNA.
There we go. There we go. Okay.
Eileen Moulton.
Cherokee Cherokee. I've been here 13 years. I've been in education for 29 years. ACNA.
Sandy Farrow.
I'm the president of the Art Center of North Arkansas.
I'm Marty Williams.
ACNA.
I'm Nanette Doherty here with the Art Center of North Arkansas Art History Association.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining us again. We've got another great crowd. So I'm going to do my usual reminders. I know it's only been 2 sessions, but you probably get that I repeat some things. So let me get my slide moving. So just for the benefit of you all and maybe even some new faces, our first session we had Rachel Reynolds from the Arkansas Craft School who really kicked off our series to talk about what folk and traditional arts. Am I what?
Nathan, I have something on the screen that I have to tell them yes.
Oh, okay. I have headphones that have a button that accidentally, like my elbow hits it. So if I do mute myself, just give me a holler so I don't have a repeat of last week where I wasn't hearing you all. So first session we had Rachel Reynolds and we talked a little bit about what folk and traditional arts means for us and some of the terminology that we use. And again, just a reminder that when we're talking about folklore and folk and traditional arts, what we're really talking about is tradition that is rooted and shared within communities. And when we use the word folk art, honestly, it's tradition with some sort of skillful component. And we as scholars don't make a judgment call on whether it's something's, great or not. It's the community that makes that judgment call. So what we're looking at is there a community standard of excellence here, and does maybe a tradition bearer meet that community standard of excellence? So, and then we started talking about oral histories. Then on our second session, we returned to finish up that conversation on oral histories, and we looked at the Zoom H1N recorders that the city of Cherokee Village has purchased. And we were missing a part when we were playing with them, I remember, and I let Grayson know what part that is. So you all should, be good to go with those recorders. And then we turned to having Lori Burrell and Kara Flynn from the University of Arkansas Libraries Division of Special Collections to talk about archiving best practices, whether that means you work with an archive or you choose to do some of that preservation and storage at home. So that was the trajectory we're on. And then tonight, we're going to talk about different ways of presenting and promoting your work. Now, tonight's a teeny bit less content packed. So if there's anything you'd like us to revisit too, please do not hesitate to let us know. And we'll have space for that after Kara and I's presentation here in a second. So please, since this is our third and final session, and really it's pretty quick for a training of this nature. If there's anything we didn't touch on, let us know. And then just as a reminder, all of the course resources, including the PowerPoints and the recordings for these sessions, live at this website. And this website will be up after this program is ended. So you'll have access to this for the long term. Any questions so far? Okay. All right. So actually, before I turn it over, a few things. The first is there's a couple other resources for you all now. I've added to our this link right here, the Scholar Resources, an evaluation. So if you wouldn't mind completing that training evaluation, we would really appreciate it. Again, as a reminder that you all are the first sort of pilot version of a long-term program that we're going to be offering. And we just received a grant to offer a little bit of a longer version of this to 3 communities. So any advice or feedback you have, please, the more the better, because you're only going to help us in the future with other programs. And related to that, I mentioned in the first session that part of the benefit of this training is not only to sort of equip you with some of the language that we use and that, like, for instance, the NEA would use when it comes to folklore and folk life, but also to create this network of folks around the state of Arkansas who are interested in doing this kind of work and excited to support each other. So to that end, we have a Facebook group for Community Scholars alumni that I will add to as each session goes on. So that's a way to communicate with other alumni. It'll be kind of small this time around because there's only a few of us, right? This is the first session. And I realized too that some of you might not have Facebook. So I'm investigating alternative modes of keeping in touch. But for now, the Facebook group is what we have. So you can find the link to that on this link on this website as well. That's also just, by the way, if you're working on projects, a Facebook group would be the perfect way to keep us informed. So if you'd like us to promote anything you're working on, we can do that too. Besides like the usual avenues of email, etc. All right. So before we jump into our presentation, a reminder that last week I gave you an assignment to practice doing an interview, whether informally or formally. Did any of you have a chance to do that this past week?
Anybody do your homework?
Did anybody?
I have an excuse. I was on vacation.
That's a pretty good one.
I know.
We're supposed to use the recorder and everything.
Yeah.
You didn't necessarily have to use the recorder this time around, but that would have been bonus points.
There you go, bonus points. Now, okay, we're all slackers. Just say.
That's okay. The purpose of that really though is if you completed an interview, I always find that I come up with questions or sort of what ifs or like discover some kinks in the process doing it. And then this would have been an opportunity to talk about it. But please know that you have me as a resource permanently. So if you want, once you start that process of interviewing, whether it's part of our town or for your own projects, if you want to talk about the process with me at any point, we can always do that. So any thoughts on the reading? So the booklet was about 48 pages, the folklore and folk life. Any questions about the reading?
Anybody? No questions about reading.
I did read it.
Okay,
I read it. I read it. Yeah.
It's a pretty easy, quick read, is it not?
It's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to be practice that's going to bring us the question.
Wait, what'd you say?
It's going to be practice that will bring up the questions. When we start trying to practice interviews and document them and what to do with them afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. And that guide will be, it has sample forms and all kinds of things. So. All right. So if there's no sort of questions or concerns about the first 2 parts, we can move on to our presentation for today. So I'm again joined by Kara Flynn of the Division of Special Collections at the U of A. And I'm going to let her kick this presentation off tonight.
Great. Hey, everybody. So tonight we are kind of talking next steps. So how do you promote work that you're doing in your community? This can be online, it can be in a physical space. So we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different tools that you can use for this. And we'll show you some things live, and we've got some kind of examples of different avenues for sharing your work. Next slide, please. All right, so like I said, we're going to talk about tools. We're also going to talk about community archival websites. So kind of grassroots communities that have created their own archives and put those online, different digital humanities projects. Digital humanities is kind of like a, I don't know, maybe it was hotter a few years ago in the kind of archives and academic world. Are y'all familiar with the term digital humanities?
Anybody know? We need to know what digital humanities.
Okay.
Yes.
So it is kind of what it sounds like. It's sort of pairing things from the humanities. So like oral history projects, you know, kind of historical collecting projects, archiving projects, even things like historical tours. So, you know, like highlighting different areas of historical interest in your community, things like that with the digital tech side. So a lot of digital humanities projects involve mapping. We'll actually look at a couple of kind of examples of that. Sometimes they're more like visualization. So a lot of times a digital humanities project could involve multiple different types of platforms. So it might live on a website and it might have like, oh, you can look at a map over here and then you can go listen to an oral history over here. So digital humanities kind of pulls together these disparate tools and platforms, but it's basically a way to share humanities projects in a digital way. So a lot of what we talk about will kind of fall under that umbrella. We also have online exhibits. We'll look at a couple examples of that. Virginia will talk to you about physical exhibits, community tours, oral history projects, and then how to kind of use YouTube and other social media platforms to share your work as well. Next. Okay, so like I said, we're gonna talk about a lot of different tools. We're gonna show you a lot of examples of different types of things that you can use and tools that you can try. I'm not gonna show you everything because that would take forever. And some things might be more, you might find that they're more relevant to you than others. And so I would encourage you to explore these different options. And if anything that we talk about tonight sounds interesting to you, maybe like put a little note to yourself and you can go check it out later. So Omeka is one option. It's a digital exhibit software. There's a free version and then there's a series of hosted versions. They start at $35 a year. It's a good kind of like content management and digital exhibit platform. So if you had a lot of physical materials, let's say like maybe the History Association has been doing some collecting and they want to share those materials. Something like Omeka could be a good option for that. Another option that is maybe a little bit, the learning curve is I think a little bit less with something like WordPress, which is essentially like a blogging platform, but it's been used for digital exhibits in the past. For websites, it's a good option if you want to share what you're working on as your project, but maybe you don't have like content that you need to manage. So you're not going to be like uploading a lot of media or pictures or things like that, but you just kind of want to share like in a blog, the work of the Our Town grant or something like that. So it would be a good option to share out people's experiences. You could have different people documenting their experience. And then it also serves as a good way to promote the work you're doing as well, because then you can, if you have a Facebook page or you have other social media, you can always link back to something like a WordPress site so that you can push that out there, and then people can click that link to get more in-depth information about what you're doing. History pin is one of my personal favorites, so I'm gonna actually pull this up and share my screen. So I'm gonna see, let's see here. Oops, sorry. Here we go. Share. Oh, all right. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay. So, have any of you ever been on History Pin or?
No.
No. Okay. So this is new. So History Pin is a really cool online platform. It's mostly a mapping platform, and I wanted to show it to you because there are all these other tools, but you kind of have to learn the tool before you can actually use it. And History Pin is a little bit more user friendly, so you can make an account just for yourself to explore it. You can explore it before you make an account. If you're affiliated with a group and your group wants to put something together, you can make a kind of a group login, and it kind of streamlines the process of getting started. So you can search by place on a map, or you can explore different collections. So different history groups will have them. Classes sometimes will do a History Pin assignment. Museums will have History Pin accounts. So earlier today, I just looked up, let's see, here we go, Cherokee Village, just to see if there was anything in your neck of the woods. So basically, when we look at a map, we'll zoom out until we get some pins. Okay, so our closest pins for you all looks like is in like Pocahontas area, Jonesboro, Salem over here. So we don't really have anything in your immediate area. So History Pin could be a good option to kind of fill out the map for your local area. But basically, you can view it in map form over here, and then you can scroll down and see these different pins. So I'm gonna focus in on Pocahontas. So they have 2 pins. So you can zoom in here and see. So they've posted photos. Jim Guy Tucker visits coffee shop in Pocahontas, and they've actually identified the coffee shop on the map. And then you can go over to their next pin. So again, it's part of the same visit. And you can see who it was pinned by. So this was pinned by UALR, Center for Arkansas History and Culture. But anyone can pin anything. So sometimes it's just an individual who's maybe got like a whole collection of family photos that document their local area. And so they'll post things on the map. Let's see, maybe Jonesboro has a lot, so that can be a good example. But you can post pretty much any kind of content. You can post oral histories. I know you all are going to be doing oral histories, so you can post recordings and use those as pins, which is cool. And then obviously you can do images. That's kind of probably the most popular option. But I did see that a couple of veterans oral history projects have pinned content on History Pin as well. And so it's a cool place you can explore and see. You can do newspaper articles. So if in your research and your kind of community work, you find things or people want to promote certain things, History Pin is kind of a cool way to not only share your community with the community, because anyone can come on HistoryPin. They don't have to have an account or anything to look at these things, but also to kind of share out into the wider internet world your local area and local history. So I'm gonna stop sharing. So that's just one option. I really like HistoryPin because, like I said, it's pretty accessible, and it's just kind of cool to explore and see what other people have added. Flickr is another good option for this. Have any of you used Flickr in the past? Yeah. Okay, so Flickr is basically like a photo sharing site, kind of like social media-ish. I guess it would fall under a social media umbrella. So that's another option for sharing kind of like photos. So if you have photos of events that you're doing, or like even if you do host some kind of like oral history day or something and you want to share photos, Flickr is a good place to host those online, and then you can share them from that online link. I think, Virginia, you're going to talk a little bit more about the SoundCloud, YouTube, and social media. So we will get to those in a little bit. And then some additional digital humanities tools. So a lot of the kind of examples that we're going to show you tonight might include some of these tools embedded within like a WordPress site or something like that. So they're a part of this toolkit, but they can be added into different things. So Neatline is a timeline creator, and that is something that you could use if you're using Omeka, the digital exhibit platform. Hindenburg, I don't know, Virginia, I think maybe this is one that you told me about because I was not as familiar with radio and podcast editing software.
Yeah, Hindenburg and Audacity both are really popular, easy to access audio editing software. And I'm just now blanking, but Zencastr. I've just learned over this past year about a third one called Zencastr that's typically used by, big name podcasters. And so each software has its virtues, but the key thing here is, especially with Audacity is 100% free. And it's a really, really popular audio editing software in the professional oral history world. Hindenburg, I think, has a paywall, but is still, I think, pretty user-friendly. And then Zencastr, I just learned about, so I didn't think to update our slide. This past year has been a real learning curve for a lot of folks who do oral history as a profession. As we talked about, in the first session, ideally you are meeting with someone face-to-face and recording your conversation with that sort of personal interaction. But with COVID-19, there has been a flurry of resources about conducting interviews remotely. And Zencastr has been a popular tool because with Zencastr, it records. So if I'm interviewing Kara, because we're in separate rooms right now, it records my audio as a file and it records her audio as a file, and it does cool things. So it preserves the sound in sort of a really cool, like a really high quality way that, for instance, just me, we're hitting record on Zoom right now. It's not going to capture sort of a raw file of both of us talking. It's going to compress it all into one file. So Zencastr is a really unique way of making sure you have archival quality files on both ends of the conversation. We aren't necessarily going to show you examples of that tonight, but if you have questions about either of those, just let me know. Those are less about the final product in presenting and more tools to help you edit your content for presentations.
Yeah, so like I know I've seen like oral history recordings posted within a WordPress site or something like that. So you might use one of these editing tools, sound editing tools to prep your interview to go on a website or SoundCloud or, some platform.
Exactly. And we'll see some of those finished products here in a minute.
Tableau is a data visualization tool. So I talked earlier about kind of the definition of digital humanities as pairing kind of humanities-based projects with the digital tools. So Tableau has lots of different data visualizations, including mapping, but also other like charts and graphs. And again, this is the kind of thing where you might create a visualization within this tool Tableau and then put it on social media or a WordPress site or Omeka or something like that. Similarly, StoryMap.js, it is a mapping tool, so you can create your own map. So if you wanted to make a map of just your local area, you could kind of have a little bit more control over how that map gets made, and then you can embed that in a site, a blog, etc., as opposed to History Pin, which is its own hosted thing, and it is kind of based in Google Maps. So it's drawing on Google Map for that map, and then you can put pins on it, whereas Story Map, you can make the map from scratch if you wanted to. And then Scalar is it's an online publishing platform. It's another good option if you want to do something sort of digital exhibit adjacent. It looks very professional. There's a little bit more of a learning curve to it because it is a tool. It's not like it's not a platform unto itself, like something like WordPress would be. So we'll move forward to some examples. Any questions so far about anything that I know we're just doing a information dump about all these tools, but feel free to jump in if you have questions at any point. So we just wanted to kind of, sometimes it's hard to visualize something in your head that you've never seen. Sorry, my cat is very loud in the background. He likes to yell. He's not getting his way. Let's see, Virginia, it went away. The cat derailed us. There we go. Okay.
Here.
Oh, thank you for pulling it up. All right, so this is an example of a digital exhibit / online archive portal. So this one in particular is the Plateau People's Portal. And as you can see, they've got kind of different types of content embedded. This can give you an idea of what you might do if you were to create sort of like a website in which you had different types of content. And they have it organized by tribe, so or what they call tribal path. And so if you wanted to learn more about a given tribe, and you click on them, and then you get a little bit of background info. And then they have different items that they've digitized. So they've got like some audio recordings, they've got video, and they're doing a lot of that kind of like traditional, like sharing of these tribal traditions and preserving them for the future by recording them and putting them online. And this one's a little bit unique in that so different tribes have different kind of principles and guidelines about, so like they have a protocol on public access that Virginia was just highlighting. So there are certain things that are accessible to anyone. And then there are certain things that are only accessible via, sort of your own account. So if you were a member of this tribe, there's certain traditions and practices and things like that that are sacred, and they're only to be seen by certain members of the tribe or by a member of the tribe, so not by, me, for example. And so there's different, and you can request community membership if you are a member of that tribe and you're kind of dispersed. And so it's a good way. I like to bring this one up as an example because access is really important, but we talked about this last time in terms of like donating collections. Not every community is going to have the same norms and kind of agreed upon approaches for providing access. So this one is cool because it combines lots of different types of content. So you can kind of see what all you could put into an online portal like this. But they're also a good example of the way that you can navigate different privacy issues, access issues, things like that.
Okay. It's a lot of moving back and forth.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Are you seeing the PowerPoint again?
Yeah, we're good. Okay. All right. We also have community archive sites. So these are kind of grassroots. I think this one actually might be a WordPress site that they have like paid the fee to have their own, basically, so that it's not at WordPress dot whatever, to have their own domain name.
Are you seeing the website?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, it's fine. So, so this one is a little bit more, because it's grassroots, it's a little bit more approachable. It's a little bit more like the type of thing that you might be able to create yourself. So they've got their collection here online, and you can browse different items. You can search the collection. And again, they've uploaded different types of content. So a lot of images, but they've also got AV, and they also have written accounts. So people's personal narratives, kind of memorializing police violence in their city. And they have also what we would call ephemera. So they've taken pictures of posters that people used in protests, things like that, that were ephemeral. They weren't made to last forever. And they've pulled stuff from all over. I mean, they've got newspaper articles, they've got visualizations, data visualizations in there. They even have like government records. So government records are open and you can request them. So they've put those up on here. And yeah, this is kind of a good example of a more DIY grassroots option.
And this one is made by Omeka. So this is an
example. Oh, it is Omeka. Okay, it's Omeka, not WordPress.
Are y'all going to share all this with us afterwards?
Yeah, I was writing a note to myself that we have the PowerPoint up, but I'm going to add the direct links to the resources section of the website. So that way you can go directly to these different links and tools.
And so follow up to that, do you have a recommendation on, if you were a small town like Cherokee Village and you wanted to create a digital repository, do you have a recommendation for which one is best for us? Starting from scratch?
Virginia, you can chime in with your own recommendation. My recommendation I guess it's sort of two parts. I would probably test out Omeka and WordPress and see if you have a preference, like kind of explore, click around, maybe like make a little test site. That's sort of a non-answer because you could go either way and either one would probably work. If I was sort of forced against a wall to give an answer, it'd probably be WordPress because it's a little bit more approachable. I think it depends on kind of what you want it to do though. So if you want it to have more of a content management function, Like this Omeka site is basically built to manage this digital collection, this collection of materials that they've collected online. WordPress is more, you know, it was made to be a blogging platform originally, and you can kind of DIY tailor it to be a little bit more like this site. But it's at its heart, it's not a content management platform. So if you wanted to be able to do sort of more of a variety of things, like post some updates that are in more of a blog style, but also post oral history interview recordings and photos and things like that, WordPress would probably be my recommendation.
I use WordPress for everything I do, and I'm going to show you some examples of that. So I'm a huge proponent of WordPress. With a very basic membership, you get quite a bit of storage too. But again, I would recommend WordPress less for managing content and more for presenting content to the community.
So Virginia, have y'all had any interaction with small towns who've said, look, we want to digitize our historical archive, and who've actually successfully done it? Have you seen that, been a part of that?
That'd be a question more for Kara.
I have not directly been a part of any projects like that. I mean, I've read about a lot of them, and I've talked to different community groups about archiving, but I haven't seen like a project from a sort of its genesis to a final like digital platform or website. But there are examples out there. So maybe I could look for some and we could post them in the resources section.
That would I think one of the things that we're thinking about here is that there's a tremendous amount of information. We're going to spend a lot of time pulling it out of people, getting copies of it, but really kind of what do we do with it next? And so that we do it in a way, because it's going to be an exhausting process, that we do it in a way that is very sustainable. And so in a way also kind of the question is about looking at your crystal ball and looking forward, because as an archivist, I mean, what are you seeing coming down the pipe? I mean, technology is changing so rapidly. So if we invest time and money into putting all this, digitizing it, scanning it, putting it into a web-based platform, you know, is there a way to diversify our collection so that we've got hard copy, we've got digital records, microfilm? I mean, what's the, is there
so I think these are great questions. And unfortunately, there's not like a really solid answer. So some of this goes back to stuff that we talked about last week. So basically making sure that you have things saved in an uncompressed file format is going to serve you in the long run, especially with that born digital media. So oral history interview recordings, any kind of like AV visual recording, but also, you know, photos. So my sort of recommendation would be, if you have physical materials that were originally physical, obviously it's always good to preserve those first of all. For your born digital materials, I would basically recommend what we talked about last week. So the uncompressed file formats, and then the compressed version. So like if this was a photo, your TIFF would be your kind of long-term archival copy, and an access copy. So the copy that you might upload to a website would be like a JPEG. And so there's that way you've got multiple copies, you've got your archival higher quality copy that should be saved in more than one place, maybe like on a hard drive, but also in the cloud. And then you've got the sort of access copy, that's the lower quality file, the compressed file that's uploaded on whatever platform you choose to use. Another thing to think about is that, you know, platforms go out of style as well. I mean, WordPress has been around for quite a while now, and a lot of people use it. So I think it's a pretty safe bet. But even in the time that I've used Omeka in the last like 4 or 5 years, it's changed a lot. The sort of paid tiers have changed. The free versions changed a lot. So something like WordPress, again, maybe this is a point in favor of WordPress. It's like a more established, really widely used platform. But if you wanted to, kind of an area that I don't usually talk about with community groups in terms of archiving is web archiving. So there's a tool called Archive It. It is a web crawler. So basically you can get a free account. You basically email Archive It administrators and they can give you a free account. But it is a tool that you basically can set up to crawl the internet. So if you wanted to archive things that are on the web right now, so, you know, like the Cherokee Village website and any other kind of community group websites that have any kind of web presence right now, and you can also crawl your own site. So if you were to create an online platform, it basically archives different versions of web pages over time. I don't know if any of you have ever looked at the Internet Archive. Anybody?
What is that?
Okay, so the Internet Archive it's an archive of the internet. So basically Archive It creates your own little personal internet archive. But like the Internet Archive, you can go back into the 90s and look at versions of web pages in all the different decades that web page has existed in. And it also preserves websites that no longer exist. So, you know, if an organization goes defunct. Oh, yeah.
So in other words, you can pick a website, like an organizational website, and see what it looked like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It constantly is crawling the entire web.
It's like a giant digital caterpillar, and it's just collecting as it moves around the internet.
Actually, let's see if the U of A is on here.
Yeah, it's definitely.
No.
Oh no, it's temporarily offline.
Well, and the reason I interjected and asked that question, because I think the longer we are working on this grant, the question that came up tonight is like, what happens with this information? Where does it go? And so for the Cherokee Village Historical Society, you know, it's got a great physical collection that's not really archived. And you know, the next step is archiving it, digitizing it, and then curating it. And so just trying to kind of put it into buckets and really putting together an actionable plan.
And I think it helps to break this into like much smaller steps too. So digitization, in terms of the way I as an archivist think of a digitization, that encompasses everything from I have created an inventory of this collection in a Word document, and that Word document is like posted online somehow, to I've scanned this item and I've created metadata, so some descriptive information about it, and it's available on Flickr or a WordPress site or something like that. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to scan all of your materials and make them accessible that way. You can kind of do it in bite-sized chunks. So, you know, I don't know what the Cherokee Village Historical Society has in terms of sort of collection description. But if you don't yet have a sort of general description of a collection that's available online, that would be a good starting place, just to, you know, give yourself a bit of a baseline. And, you know, you can do things in kind of small chunks. So Born Digital Materials might actually be the place that you do want to start. You're going to be creating these oral history recordings. Those are already digital objects, and you could pretty easily put those up online. So maybe you actually start in reverse. You start with the things that are already digital, you get those going, and then you kind of go to your physical materials and figure out how you want to prioritize. Like, what is it? You know, you might prioritize things if they're super fragile. You want to make sure that you've got a copy that can be accessible, even if the physical materials continue to deteriorate, or you might do it based on interest area. So like maybe a lot of people are interested in a specific type of object or a group of objects. So that's how you kind of decide how you want to, you know, what you want to scan first or whatever. I feel like I'm not giving like concrete answers to these questions, and I apologize.
No, that's helpful. It gives us something to think about, and we were over at the Historical Society today, and just kind of thinking about the materials there and how do we, you know, even your collection description, I don't know that there is a collection description. I don't know that there is a table of contents.
And crowdsourcing events can actually be really good options for creating that kind of description. So I know the University of Arkansas has done some things like that, especially with our university archives. So inviting people from the community and being like, hey, here's a bunch of stuff that we have that we don't have a description for. Like, do you know who's in this photo? Do you know when this photo was taken? Things like that. So sometimes, I mean, you know, we're still coming out of COVID, but sometimes a community event can be a good way to jumpstart that, and to get people interested, and maybe, you know, get some longer term volunteers who want to spend some time working on doing that detective work. So
and that crowd
is that they had a photograph that they knew it was the postmaster of party in the 1920s, but they didn't know who the lady was in the photo with them. And somebody came in and said, "Oh, I know who that is." And they told them.
So do they put it out on social media to say who is this?
No, they just had it out talking about it, and word of mouth got around, and they came in and identified people.
Did you hear that?
Yeah. So it sounds like they had some photos out and someone was able to identify. They knew it was like from the 20s, and they didn't know who was in the photo.
Invitational event to bring people in there too.
Yep.
So they were invited. Like you're
saying.
Yeah,
They were invited. It was an invitation, you know, grand opening. But just because of the grand opening and all the people that showed up, photographs that were there got identified as to who was what and when.
And you can do that online. So for instance, through
social media,
putting it on Facebook. And I know there's a lot of community groups that do it that way. Even the Library of Congress sometimes crowdsources historic records, and you can, if you're bored, go online and volunteer some time to help transcribe letters or things like that. So it's a popular concept to crowdsource that. But I want to just summarize going back to what you were saying, Jonathan, the idea that the content, there's no software online that's going to be the answer for storing your content long-term. That's got to be stored on like, whether it's physical or whether it's like on hard drives and things like that. That's because platforms change, that storage has to happen independently of a website. The website's more for digitizing and getting it out there and maybe even organizing it and presenting it, things like that. So, and then there's separate software for organizing that's not a website, but for like keeping track of your physical collections. Like Past Perfect is one that museums use a lot.
So think of a website as a presentation tool. Think of a data package in the cloud as your storage, or external hard drive as your storage. Okay.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of them that work together, right? So like Past Perfect is a popular museum inventory software, but they have tools that you can then put the images on websites. So there's lots of options out there.
Well, you know, the other thing, because we have in this room, you know, Cherokee Village, Historical Society, Hardy, History Association. We've been talking to some of the library folks. I think it's not just about Cherokee Village and our town grant, but, you know, how do we help each other think about these archives that are being built up at the Hardy History Museum, at the Cherokee Village Historical Society, the Ash Flat Historical Room, the Sharp County Library Historical Room. And maybe there are tools within the library system that already exist that we could be thinking about how do we team up so that maybe instead of creating 4 digital libraries, we're creating one with different rooms, digital rooms. So because we're talking about spending some money to maintain data storage, to so I don't know if the library system has money for that. But anyway, I'm just thinking out loud.
And that's exactly, I think Kara's point about, that's one of the benefits of partnering with a repository, or is that they might have that kind of structure in place. And you could be looking at the various entities as collections. So you could have like the City of Cherokee Village collection, the Historical Association collection, but it's all under the umbrella of
yeah,
one.
And if you are looking to spend some money on some kind of software package or something like that, it might behoove you to approach it as like that. Here's this cohort of organizations in this community who all are going to use one system. And of course, if the library is already using a system, they may not want to use a new. So it kind of depends on where you're all at. But I know that sometimes helps in terms of cost sharing, but also you might get a better deal from a package if you have multiple organizations that are co-using this.
Well, just to think about this as we oftentimes in the work that we do on our teams is we try to think regional. So, we define ourselves as the Ozark Foothills region. And so what does that mean when we talk about the foothills? So in some of our stuff we talked about earlier, the railroad, the rivers, the pearl trade, but there's lots of things that are outside of Sharp County, but that are very important for our region that, we might, as we're working individually on these projects, also be thinking about a regional approach to archiving this. Because then I think we also could probably get some really good state resources if we show them that we've got some regional cooperation and that the state can put some money in, the library system can put some money in. It's not just helping one town, but 5 or 6 towns. I mean, all of these towns have all written history books, Salem, Cave City, Evening Shade. So just something for us to think about as a group.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I know that the community that I used to work in Georgia, they kind of had a sort of informal meetup group of the History Museum and the Historical Association and the library. And this group would kind of get together and just like have lunch once a month. So, you can start really small and just start forging those connections and getting all those people into a room together and see.
Hey, related to that, I was over at a museum at Fairfield Bay, and there's a term for people who are kind of history ambassadors, and it's an actual international network that they were talking about, and I cannot for the life of me remember what it is. But does that sound familiar to either of you? It's like
I'm not familiar with that, but it sounds cool.
But it's like you've heard of the hash, runners who, whenever you travel somewhere, you get involved with the hash group, like local running groups or wherever you go. And there's a group of people who love historical research, and wherever they go, they're in Fairfield Bay, in the little city of Fairfield Bay, they've got a really wonderful old cabin that they brought up from before they flooded the lake, the Greer's Ferry. And they brought that cabin up to preserve it. And now it's a museum. And Rachel, were you with me when we were up there? Gosh. Anyway, I'll think of it, but it's a network of people like what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe that's something you can tap into. I'm not familiar with it, but it sounds really cool. All right, Virginia, do you want to keep on trucking? So I don't think we need to like pull this one up, but this is an example of, this was June of last year. I was clearly working on a theme. This one's also police violence, not the lightest of topics. So anyway, this is another example of the kind of digital humanities tools that you could embed within a site, within another platform. So this one is a map. I think this one was made with Tableau, maybe. So they have taken all this data and then they've visualized that into a map, and you can click on the different sort of pins on that map and see a little bit of background information. And I believe that they have like, if they have any kind of written documentation or images or something like that, those are posted there as well. So I know that they've got like government documents that they've uploaded and newspaper articles and things like that. And this one is actually a crowdsourced project. So they rely on a community of data collectors to add information to their database. And that's what kind of populates this map. Next slide.
All right, so I think it's my turn. So a lot of these projects have crossover, but keep in mind the ones that Kara have shown, you could say that they're online exhibits, but we're calling them more like community archive websites or like digital humanities projects. And I'm going to show you some examples of more the kind of work that I would do, which I would call online exhibits. But honestly, it's like we're talking about, they're all kind of in the same pool of ways of presenting your research. So I would love to show you an example. I have an example from AFTA next, but I'd love to show you more examples from AFTA, but keep in mind, we are about 2 years old, and the whole second year was during the pandemic. So I have a lot of examples from my previous life of things that I've created as well. So, and this is one of them that I'm particularly proud of. I'm going to show you the website. This was a physical exhibit that we did at the Kentucky Museum. That's the name of the museum. And we wanted to create an online component that could live on, well, that could first support, we wanted to be able to support the exhibit with digital components, but we also recognized that a website could live on long past the physical exhibit. So the physical exhibit ran for it was meant to run for a year, and we kept it up for 2.5 years because it was really popular. And we had iPads, like literal iPads stationed throughout the exhibit, mounted on the walls throughout the exhibits that gave you this site. There's software out there that you can use to sort of lock the touch screen. So that way visitors can't like surf the net. They can only see the site you want them to see. And so this was a way for us to add audio visual elements to the exhibit in a way that was really easy and honestly, frankly, very affordable for us. So this was an exhibit, an oral history project with Bosnian American community living in Bowling Green, Kentucky. The city was about 70,000 people, and about 10,000 of those people were Bosnian Americans. And a large portion of those even still were survivors of genocide during the Bosnian War. So this site we made on WordPress. I think we pay like $100 for this a year, max, to maintain it. This was done by me and a graduate assistant. So if we can do it, you all can do it. An example, so we have these matched the themes of the physical site. Let me find an example. So we highlighted a few people's stories of coming over to Bowling Green. So can you see the website? Making sure I'm, okay. So this was Sadetta Hojic's story. So we're able to give an overview of her story, but we have actual audio clips from her oral history. And we even include a link to a transcription for accessibility. We have images, we have poll quotes that we pulled out, all kinds of things. So it was a way to really sort of complement the physical space. And again, there was a lot of work to do this project. So I'm excited that the website lives on long past the physical exhibit. You just have to consider the cost of maintaining the domain and the service that you use. So like I said, I think we pay like $100 a year to maintain this. And again, this is WordPress. So it's just really easy way to highlight different things. Like we even could include, let me find, we included like links to YouTube videos that you can embed of like popular Bosnian American music or performances from folks in the local community. So like this was a Bosnian performer performing at a local festival. So different things that you can highlight. Again, this is an example of a project too that was using oral history to talk specifically about a difficult topic, but through the lens of tradition. So how do people commemorate loss? What are the traditions of the community, from sort of recreational traditions, which includes music, dance, soccer is very important to the Bosnian American community. Foodways, how people spend time together, how people decorate their home, and then even sort of material culture related to the different religions that folks celebrate and that are from Bosnia. So this website was super easy. Well, I don't want to say super easy, but it was achievable and easy to do. And we also added a component where we could ask people to sign up if they'd like to participate. So WordPress would be a tool where you could also add a section where you can have content that maybe you're like, we need your help identifying folks in these photographs, or would you like to share something to our project? Fill out this form. And then when someone fills that form out, it emails someone. When I was at Kentucky Folklife Program, it emailed me directly to let me know that someone was interested in participating. So it's super easy to create these forms in WordPress. So this is an example of one project. Let me pull up sorry, this is sort of unwieldy to flip from PowerPoint to.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Are we doing this concentrating on Cherokee Village and the history of Cherokee Village, and the purpose is to keep it as an archive for people to be able to go to for interest, for a project that they might have, lots of different ways, but the archive is there so that people can pull it out and use it.
Yes.
And most of the people that we're going to be dealing with are not computer literate. And so they're all going to have to learn, including myself, how to run through the computer and the websites to find out which website works the best, or which program works the best.
Well, you mean for the actual building it out?
Right. But
No,
first of all, are we going to meet with people to find out what the history is?
Oh,
who,
yeah.
what, why, when, and where?
Yeah.
Starting with
Which we've already started, which is this, this is the start of that. I mean, we're not starting it, people before us have started it, but this, what you see on the wall is even the beginning of that as a part of this grant. And, but
and this is all Cherokee Village.
No, I mean, Cherokee Village is
and
the last,
community.
yeah,
Right.
I mean, you go all the way back, it's pre-Cherokee Village.
Right,
Yeah.
But the area.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it goes down into Pocahontas with the Black River.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead. Well, what I was to say, Marty, on the building out of the website, I'm not, when we do this to figure out how to create a really good archive at the Cherokee Village Historical Society. One of my, and no one here is from the Historical Society that I know of that's a member, but I've been working with Betty and Mary. One of the weaknesses for the Historical Society in Cherokee Village is that we need to recruit young people into that society who are going to carry that forward. And part of that is this is underlying in this process is to get young people excited about this history and also preserving the history and celebrating it and presenting it as part of what Patricia talked about earlier too. And as that happens, I mean, and I'm talking about people younger than me, digitization, and this, I mean, like, it has to be a part of what we do because it's the only way that we're going to reach that younger generation. And so when it comes time to digitize this stuff, it won't be Betty and Mary doing it. We will be bringing in people who will help us do this. What Mary has done up there is the sweat of actually bringing the physical stuff together and displaying it, which is a really important part. But now we need to figure out how we not just keep collecting the physical, but then how do we present it?
What's our job?
Well, so this particular scholars program is a part of our R-Town grant, which is a Cherokee Village R-Town grant. But the scholars program is really for Virginia to help us think about not only how do we think about the Cherokee Village Historical Society and our archives and the research that we're doing through the grant, but how do we think about the Hardy History Association's archives and what they're doing, and the library's archives and what they're doing.
Or even you as individuals, if you'd like to take on projects.
Well, let's say someone says, you know, I'm really passionate about the Cherokee Village Methodist Church, and nobody is collecting the history on this church. Who designed it, the ministers who were here, you know, say that was a passion for me. This training could spark that, and I could say, I'm going to focus on that, and I'm going to capture the history of the Cherokee Village Methodist Church.
So we could take basically any one of these little elements and hone in on it, each one of us, one or two or not.
So the community scholars training is really for Virginia to help train us to start thinking about this in different ways, and all the way down from personal, I want to preserve my parents' history, and so I'm going to do an oral recording of my mom and dad, to we want to think about how we preserve the history of this village. And the point of the R-Town grant specifically is how we look at this history to understand who we are, how we got here, and where we want to go as a community for the future, and how it influences, the history influences the design of future development of this community, our assets, housing, trails. So the R-Town grant is really a really big umbrella that we're putting lots of things underneath.
Right.
And
big house.
It's a big house, yeah. And you know, she's not here today, but Rebecca, who's a history teacher at the Highland School, you know, maybe one thing that comes out of this is we inspire her to think about how what she does next school year with local history and her students.
I was going to say, I know there was a history teacher in the mix, and that would be a great way to get some younger people involved, and, you know, kids that were born into the era of the internet and blogging and computers.
And we might have teachers for her. We might go into her classroom and teach her these things.
Yes.
So, you know, you might, we're not all necessarily having to focus on a specific topic or to do all of these roles. We may take on individual roles. You might collect information, or you might archive it, or you might digitize it, or you might publicize it. There are all these different roles, or you might only do some of that for one or a few topics. But as a group, I think collectively we're taxed with this project as a whole.
And again, you're coming into this PowerPoint where we're specifically taking a section to talk about digital stuff, but where's the first session focused on actually physically getting out and talking to people. The second part talked a lot about how do you organize those physical materials. And then this is the first part. What we've shown you is a few digital tools, but here in a moment, we'll talk about different physical ways of presenting that research as well. So I think it takes a combination of those things to really reach an audience. So like, for instance, I showed you that digital component, but there's a lot of people who will never go to the website. They wanted to see the physical exhibit, and they maybe benefited from the website because they could scroll around on the iPads, but that's the most they're going to engage with it. And that's okay. But a variety of these options are.
Yeah, and even, sorry, can I jump in?
Yeah.
I don't want to cut you. You know, even I was just reading a case study of a community group that they basically polled their community, and they were like, well, this is great. This online portal that you've created is great for all these other people who are more tech savvy, but I'm just never going to learn how to navigate it, you know, let alone upload stuff to it. So they put out like DVDs of their oral history recordings. So they like gave those out to community members so that they could still have kind of a sampler platter of the oral history interviews that were going on to a site. So I mean, think creatively. You can disperse this kind of content in all different ways, even in ways that we're not going to talk about tonight.
And we're going to give you the full scope, because the other thing to consider with online components, though, is they add an element of accessibility for differently abled people. So people who may be hard of hearing, or, you know, maybe blind. And so the benefit of things like transcripts is if they have a screen reader, they could listen to the, you know, the transcripts or the audio with the audio clips themselves. They can listen to the audio clips. So these digital components can add a degree of accessibility for people.
Bring it to a younger audience too, because some young people they don't really pick up books. We don't have to say anymore. I like to do things online too, but we can do pamphlets and booklets and books. There's so many things we can do for people who don't. It's online.
Let me show you, for the sake of time, let me show you a few more examples, and then we're going to end with more discussion. So if there's still other things we haven't covered, we can return to this. This is another thing. It's a WordPress site, again, of an exhibit that I did in partnership with Special Collections staff member, Amy Allen, who's the university archivist. And we interviewed people about their memories of homecoming. And so same thing, WordPress, easy to do. And we have actual audio clips broken down into various themes, so you can listen to these folks' memories. But we interspersed it with archival material as well. So you're seeing this, right? Okay. Just I still am paranoid that you're like just looking at a blank screen while I'm.
Batesville.
Well, it's from David Cox.
From
I wonder
Batesville.
if that's our former.
Maybe
No,
he's from
2019. That's too young. Never mind.
Yeah, he was David Cox, for instance. I wanted to show sort of a spectrum of experiences for homecoming memories. And same thing, I did the same thing with the last one, where at the very end, you can put whether you're interested in participating or not. Again, going back to like what Kara's examples and this example too, don't forget the idea of contemporary collecting. You don't have to necessarily just focus on sort of the old timers in your community, though you definitely want to capture their stories. Don't forget to also capture the stories of the younger groups, even like high school age groups in your community as well, because they're going to have different experiences.
That's history in the making.
Yes, yes. So with that in mind, those are two different websites. I want to show you a few other things. This next example might actually be answer a teeny bit of your question, Jonathan, about like a local community and what you can do. There was a small town in Horse Cave, Kentucky, that they contracted with a former community scholar in Kentucky, because they knew where to go for advice, to do a walking tour of their community based on tradition. And so this was one of their final products. Again, I'm going to move all these links onto the resources page for you all too, so you can directly click on them. But they worked with a folklorist and a community scholar to help them create this. And they broke it down into various themes. And the audio clips live on the website, but they partnered it with a cell phone walking tour. So there are different services you can use where you can work with a company or even sort of create one yourself, where you can put visual signage at different spots around town and have a number that someone can call to find out about that site. So they did a couple components of that, but the goal was to create a walking tour for their town. Was someone going to say something? Okay.
My hometown is doing this. Appleton City, Missouri.
Doing a walking tour?
They're doing a walking tour.
That's
They're
what I
working
was-
on that in Hardy.
Yeah, that's
Audio
what I
and,
wanted to do
and
here.
video too.
They're working on that in Hardy. They're working on doing that in Hardy. A walking tour.
Well, and I think one of you had mentioned in the first session, you know, like the fact that buildings are changing and there's like, you know, downtown isn't what it used to be. And that was one of the focuses of this project, is they had a couple stops at different buildings and they talked about what used to be in that building and what people remembered about that building. So for instance, the city manager of Horse Cave, his family used to own like the main department store downtown. So they had like, you know, memories of going to get your clothes tailored there and all kinds of stuff. Talking about what the town looked like before and what it looks like during. So, and just as a fun aside, this is the coolest city because it's really small, but if you'll notice in that picture, there's a cave opening, a huge cave opening, literally smack dab in the middle of their town. So a few other things you can think about. So if you'll notice, one of the examples Kara gave, I think it was the digital archiving tool. They used Vimeo, Vimeo, to embed videos. Vimeo is a service where you can literally upload video files, kind of like YouTube. The sound equivalent, so for audio files, is SoundCloud. And so some of these options are great because they're free and it gives you a URL to share with people. So you might have a very basic web page for your project, and then you could link to these various services. That might be easier than sort of embedding them all in the site itself. So for instance, this project was a series of oral history interviews that graduate students did, and they uploaded the interviews when they were done to SoundCloud. And so you have a simple link right there. You can add some metadata to explain what the interviews are about and who's in them. Super easy to do. And there's far less of a learning curve than sort of curating an Omeka site. Related to that, you can do a good old-fashioned YouTube video. And the cool thing with YouTube is that if you have video, great, but you can don't, just because YouTube is a visual medium, don't forget that you can still do audio and pair it with some still images. And actually YouTube even has some tools within its site that help you do that. I created this video in YouTube itself. I uploaded the audio and then I picked a few images and they just change the images every couple seconds as the audio goes. So YouTube is a really great way of curating content as well. And in fact, I just recently did some revamping on our YouTube channel. Let me just show you a few things that I like to do with YouTube. With YouTube, you can curate playlists. So one of the things that I have been working on is curating playlists of examples of Arkansas folk life. And they don't even have to be videos that I created. They could be videos that other people created, but I add them to playlists. So let me pull up our YouTube website. I think it's here. So you have here the videos that I have created, right? But there's actually far more under playlists. So for instance, I've gone through and done some searching and found a bunch of videos. If you look here on the right-hand side, produced by like the Arts Council, different TV channels, Arkansas PBS, and I've curated them into a playlist. So that's another way too to sort of gather materials from a variety of different entities and keeping them in one place. I also don't want you to underestimate the importance of just social media itself. Social media, we forget sort of in our personal lives, but social media is curating. You are curating your life. So organizations can curate content for audiences as well. So I have an example here of one that we used to do this program in Kentucky called Folklorist in the Park. So every summer we would have a folklorist or a community scholar stationed at one of our state or national parks, and they would do oral histories that summer. And this was some of the content that was generated. So I took an image from one of the interviews, and rather than like, think about your caption as an exhibit label, right? So we did a little summary, like what you would do in an exhibit label right next to the Instagram image. And then we put a link to the project in our profile. So you can create an Instagram account for the project and think strategically about what images you want to share. Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter are the big three social media right now. Instagram's more visual. Twitter is more about quick little factoids or like small amounts of text. And Facebook is really the place to do more sort of detailed posts and things. An example I would point to for really great Instagram curation is the U.S. Holocaust Museum. They do Instagram stories that are like so informative and immersive, and they pair it with text and images and video from their archive. And so for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and move on. But I want to also sort of end with not forgetting the importance of physical presentations as ways of presenting your projects. You can think about exhibits in a number of ways. Do you want a permanent exhibit or do you want a temporary exhibit? Who do you want to partner for an exhibit? Do you want it to travel? What is your budget? People tend to think of exhibits as containing physical objects, but they don't necessarily have to as well. You can even create facsimiles of objects visually if you'd like. So there's a variety of different ways of thinking about this. And then I'm going to show you a few examples, and then we'll also end by thinking about some different ways you can incorporate folklore and folklife into actual events and festivals. So I always share this because I think it's pretty underrated, but also, well, I should say underrated in the general public, but I've noticed in sort of like the museum folklore world, it's like the really sexy thing right now is to have portable exhibits that are composed of these retractable banners. And the reason is that you can tour these around town and they're so easy to transport because they literally retract down. There's a couple, I've included a couple links of different organizations that really make use of these retractable banners, but you can really make them, even though they're 2D, you can really make them visually interesting.
Jonathan is pulling over an example.
What was that?
Jonathan is pulling over an example to show the grade.
Oh, yes, exactly. And so there's a couple of things to think about with retractable banners too, is you can still create sort of a physical experience in the way that you place them. So, way for people to sort of move through it and experience the content. And you can also divide them out. So for instance, in this exhibit, you see those little squares at the bottom? We had little Post-it note type things that were highlighted based on what content that particular panel showed as a wayfinding mechanism. So you could see where this panel fit in the grand scheme of the exhibit. And we actually toured these around libraries across the state 2 panels at a time. So for a couple months, they'd have 2 panels. And then the next couple months, they'd have an additional 2 panels. And so those Post-it notes helped people figure out sort of what they were seeing in the grand scheme of the exhibit. But yeah, so if you go back to this example, like 1 panel is like $100. It's super cost effective, especially for small organizations, to do exhibits this way. So here's some examples. We had a 6-piece exhibit. And then these were the panels. And we partnered with students. Students designed these. And then we sort of finessed them and finished them up a bit. But, you know, free labor. They were getting experience out of it. So retractable banners, I can't recommend enough. With physical exhibits, I don't necessarily have an image to show you. Kara and I were talking about, like, we could show you examples of physical spaces, but physical spaces, I think you can sort of intuit how you would like to do a physical exhibit. And there's a lot of technical considerations that would go into that, but that would be a whole nother session. And it's not necessarily our, you know, if you're thinking about like design elements and accessibility and things like that, that could be a whole separate unit. So I have some resources at the end that are my favorite resources that I go to when I'm designing a physical exhibit. But before I do that, I wanted to show you some examples of ways that you can incorporate, or actually, let me go and jump ahead while we're at it. So these are some exhibit design resources that I would recommend. Beverly Searle's exhibit labels, as I understand it, is like the Bible for writing exhibit labels. She's got them broken down into different chapters about different kinds of exhibits that you might do. So if you're going to create a physical exhibit and you'd like a resource on that, that's what I'd recommend. But in terms of all the sort of other technical aspects of creating an exhibit, the American Association for State and Local History produces these things called technical leaflets, and they've got hundreds of them on a variety of topics. So there's some about like creating engagement in exhibits with children and families, and there's all kinds of stuff. So I would go to that resource to peruse all kinds of different advice and tips for creating physical exhibits. But if you're doing some sort of physical event or a physical exhibit, I would always pair it with some sort of live programming element when you can. And to a certain extent, that's pretty self-explanatory, right? You know, you've all been to lectures or book talks, right? And you've seen what that looks like. But I want to talk about sort of a beloved form of public programming in the world of folklore. And that is what we call narrative stages, which is actually a model that's taken from the Smithsonian Folklife Festival. They do narrative stages at their festival every year. And the goal of a narrative stage is to sort of build off of your oral history skills. It's like doing an oral history interview, but live in front of an audience. So in this clip, let me pull this up. We've got Mark Brown, who is, I'm including this because Mark Brown created this version of Community Scholars that we're modeling ours off of. So I really admire him. But what you center your audience, and then you have a community scholar, a folklorist, or a community member who is not foregrounded, but is maybe off to the side, who is doing the interviewing. So like an oral history interview, you're still asking open-ended questions and really making sure that the person who's speaking the most at the event is the artist or the tradition bearers themselves. So all the principles we talked about in the first class still stand, right? Asking one question at a time, making sure that you ask questions that are open-ended and not leading questions so people can take it in different directions. The cool thing is you can record these as well, and they make wonderful archival documents in and of themselves. So if I...
Town hall meeting in politics.
What was that?
It's like a town hall meeting of politics, only this is not politics.
Kind of, except that you are, it's like it's honestly the best example I can give is like you're doing an oral history interview, but an audience is there watching you do it.
No joint person show.
And the cool thing with that is there's always a lightheartedness that comes out, so it's usually a different tone than an oral history interview. And if I hit play, can you hear it? Can you hear that audio? Okay. I'm not sure how to
I turned it up.
fix that.
I think it's like an advanced sharing option.
Oh.
I can hear it ever so slightly, Virginia.
Okay. Well, it's not necessarily key that you can hear it. It's just more I want to see what the folklorist in action looks like. Let me skip ahead a little bit. So what you can see here is Mark Brown is introducing the topic. Then he'll go down the line and introduce the participants. And then he'll, or ask them to introduce themselves. And then he'll turn it over to them. And that can include, if it's a musician, for instance, like have them have their instrument with them. Let them demonstrate live and, as they're talking. So.
Musicians are like that better than fighting.
So the key here, what you're seeing here too, is that think about the composition of who you include, because I think the most powerful narrative stage events are events because you have multiple people, which makes sort of a different dynamic than a one-on-one interview. You end up having people sort of riff off each other. So I've had events with like local community festivals where someone will have a memory and then the other person will be like, oh my gosh, I forgot about that. And then they'll share their memory. So you can really get something really powerful going with a narrative stage. And that dynamic is really, really, really fun. The other thing you can do is I would sort of have a list of questions like you would do with an oral history interview of things you'd like to ask different people. So you can make sure that everybody gets sort of an equal say. Everyone on stage gets an equal sort of moment in the conversation. And then you can even open it up to the audience to have the audience ask questions. I did a narrative stage once where we talked about, it was actually in Horse Cave. We talked about a historically Black neighborhood in Horse Cave. And it led to a really, really powerful discussion with the people on stage and the community members talking about memories of segregation and desegregating Horse Cave. And people were just sharing memories back and forth. It was amazing, on stage and off stage. It was a really interesting way to sort of generate a community discussion about different topics. You can do music, we've done like community cookbooks, local sports traditions. People love to talk about their local sports stars. And then an example that I was going through my own personal archive and I realized I didn't have an image for is foodways. One thing that we did in Kentucky is we actually created a mirror. I'm going to stop sharing so I can sort of show you with gestures. We created a mirror that was on legs, and then the mirror looked down on the stage, and then so that way when we could put we angled it so it showed the stage but you could see it from the audience. So we would have a table up and folks would demonstrate things like how to make fried apple pies, or like I remember tamales, or one year one woman showed how to make her popcorn balls because everybody in Horse Cave knew about her popcorn balls. But because
we did the same thing. We did a lot of cooking.
Yeah, it's popular too, and people come for food. Never underestimate a conversation about food.
At the Hardy History grand opening this weekend, they took recipes from the Hardy History cookbook and made those had, they weren't cooking them there, but they had those recipes produced, and then they had cards that told this came out of the cookbook.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ladies that came by to visit the food table said, "That's my recipe."
Oh, that is so cool.
It took us a while to get people trained though to look at that mirror.
Yeah, the audience.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, and it's great because, like I said, it's a super easy way you can build it in house, but that way the audience can see the person demonstrating, but they can also see what's on the table. In general, if you want to do a narrative stage where someone can make something or do something with their hands, there's a lot of value to that because memory can often be tied to sort of movements. And so it's pretty powerful if you do a narrative stage while someone is demonstrating. It just brings up different kinds of memories. And also the questions you get are really cool. So like our foodways narrative stages were always the most popular. And you have questions about like how people do certain, tasks to all kinds of things. We did the Bosnian project I told you about. We did a couple foodways events, especially in making Bosnian coffee, where we had a couple Bosnian women demonstrate how to make coffee. But while they were doing it, they were talking about how coffee is important to their culture and why it was something that was really important that they have access to a traditional Bosnian coffee pot when they moved here. So a lot of people, that was like the one or few items that they brought with them. And so because of that, while they're demonstrating coffee and folks are coming up and trying the coffee, you have conversations about what that meant to pack just a few belongings to be a refugee. What was that like? What was it like coming to Bowling Green? It actually creates space for some pretty powerful conversations, but in a really approachable sort of community, I want to say, like a non-threatening, really sort of open, warm way, right? The key with events like this too is you're also creating that connection between the folks on stage and the audience, so people feel like they know something about that person and can be comfortable enough to sort of get to know each other. So they're really great ways of breaking the ice too. So we could give you like a billion more examples. If you want more examples, we could curate them. I have been writing down lists of things we've talked about, even things that aren't on the slides. So I'm going to make sure to update the resources section of the website. But does anyone have any questions about different ways of presenting?
No.
I think our brains are dead.
Yes.
You're overloaded. They're not dead.
Yeah. Okay, overloaded. There you go.
And I really think what my personal opinion at this stage is, just like Marty was asking, we need to go, this upper level needs to figure out the next steps for us.
Well, and we've already started developing like a website. So then that can kind of house some of that stuff. And so then it's just figuring out who's going to do what and who's
We're
getting
gonna
what
have to meet
information.
again after this training. though.
Yeah.
Oh,
We
yeah,
can't
for
just
sure.
go off in the wind.
Exactly.
No.
That's my
Lose all
point.
this.
That's part of my point,
Yeah.
is that, y'all got to come back to us with, okay,
Projects.
where are you going? Because I can tell you, I was sitting here thinking about this, and my interest is art. Okay, we've lost a really good glass artist, Roy Mallory, several years ago. But Roy Wiles, I believe, is still living, and he was really good friends with Roy Mallory. So I want to get his remembrances of Roy, because I know Roy did stained glass work around here for a lot of the churches. So I also want to go to the churches and see, do you know who did your stained glass? So, that's.
So I think one of the things for us in terms of how do we go forward is, and even just having Steve and Trey here for a couple of days, they've been doing all this work and they've never been here. So just being on the ground really reshapes the way they're looking at things. And I think what I oftentimes think about things in buckets. And I think we've got a lot of buckets here. And so art is one of those buckets, and music is a bucket, and scouting is a bucket. And so I think because there's so much, I think we probably need to develop a list of those buckets, find some owners of each of them who are going to help facilitate and focus in on each one of them. So, you know, last week we talked about some events that were, so Rachel Reynolds we've reached out to, and we're going to do an Arkansas Traveler kind of 48 hours about the Arkansas Traveler, which is going to allow us to really focus in on that topic and try to gather physical, oral, everything that we can get about that. And then we'll do the same for Ife Jones. Eileen and Patricia were talking tonight. I was thinking we should do one just on what is mid-century design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
You know, I can say, oh, mid-century modern. It's like, what is that? What does it look like? What are the
examples?
Right.
I mean, yeah.
And so we may do something we're going to do something just on Ife Jones. We may do something just on mid-century modern design. And so I think these buckets are going to help us organize, and through that, I think when we were emailing with Rachel about her coming, and her thought, kind of what we had pitched her is come here for 2 days, and we may just do a full day where we set up at the Civic Center at Hardy, and we just invite people to come in, bring what you've got, bring your remembrances, set up oral interviews, let people bring their pictures and whatever, so we can scan in, photograph, record stories, do oral interviews, but do it on that theme. And there's no telling what we'll get branch out, because then someone may show up and say, well, I don't really know a lot about this. I'm interested in it. You know what? I can tell you a lot about Cedar Valley Park. And then,
so now you got into contact.
That's right. And then we'll do that for scouting as well. And we'll do that for all these buckets. And I think that's going to be our way of organizing ourselves. And before we do that, then we're going to take what we learned in the Community Scholars Program to say, okay, my gosh, if we've got that 48-hour event, we better know who's doing the interviews, who's recording them, what happens after that happens, if we get a table set up and people are bringing stuff in, who's recording that, who's taking pictures of the material.
And coordinate with Hardy History Association because they've started that project.
Well, so Darlene called me.
Yeah, I knew
and
that.
And so we're going to team up with them on that specific event.
Right.
So, and then we'll look for other partners. When we do the scouting one, we're going to team up with Old Kai Kingdom. They've already got a museum.
Yeah.
And so, so I think that's the only way really for us to go forward. And that's going to, I think the rest of this month in July is really planning to figure out how we're going to do that. And then I think August, September, October, the 1st of November is our target to get all that done. And then so before we hit Thanksgiving, we've said, okay, we've covered Native American, Ife Jones, Ozark Pioneer. We've covered it all. We've done our research. And then we're starting to bring all this together for an exhibit, for, archive, for design discussions. Yeah. So
I want to note just one little note of maybe caution though, is keep in mind that other things might come up, even though you're organizing around a theme or a bucket, other topics might come up. And you don't want to structure your interview in a way that you sort of ignore them because you're focused in on that bucket, because it might take you down different avenues of inquiry. So it doesn't.
That's part of what we were discussing is bringing people on the topic of the theater. And they may say, well, I don't know a whole lot about the theater except this little bit.
Right.
That these people from Cedar Valley Park, that they had something to do with it. So
right.
You made a link, you made a connection. So you don't ignore it. You note it and you put it into the next bucket, but you do pay attention to what they say.
Right, right. And they might not be an expert in the theater like you thought they were, but they might be an expert in something else that's still.
Exactly. And you know, not to put too fine a point on it, but you know, it's my interest. The theater is a form of the arts.
Yeah.
You know, the art center is a form of the arts. And this stained glass, which seems to be a dying art around here, is part of the arts. So it's something that we don't want to lose either, because there's a lot of artisans, a lot of well-known artists. Kathy Demko that was here.
Sure.
She in the art world, she's a famous person.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a lot of people that have come through that are different parts of the arts.
Well, and we've also talked about, when we talk about cultural assets, we talk about nature, plants, when we talk about culinary and food, what is our local cuisine?
Exactly.
What are the local traditions? I mean, there's so many pieces of this that we haven't even really gotten too deep into. And I think these buckets are going to allow us to organize certain things, but I think other things will come up that we hadn't thought about. And we can, even though when the Our Town grant expires, that doesn't mean what we're doing stops. I think we're creating a foundation for something that's going to hopefully go on for quite some time. So I think this has been really helpful for us to just think about, you know, I'm sure everybody here is kind of wondering, like, am I supposed to go out here and now start doing all these interviews? And I don't think that was really the purpose for us of this. It was more really to think about how we structure the next months ahead.
And make us think about resources too, though,
yes.
and what we want to, and
what
come up with more ideas.
What do we want for the future?
And one thing that I hope that we get out of this is, you know, I always see people going in different directions. I really would love to see people working together, all of these different organizations, because they all have such vital people in it, but resources are always scarce. And so we want to make sure that we're doing the most with the resources that we have and really serving our community to the best of our ability.
I did want to know, Lori has graciously, I feel bad. We haven't given her a lot of time, but Lori has joined us too, in case you have any questions that she can answer. Again, Lori Burrell is the Associate Dean for the Division of Special Collections. So AFTA, we're in that division, and Kara works in that division too. You don't necessarily have but if you have any questions for her too, we've got time. We've got some time to puzzle through anything with you all further.
I think, you know, we have another meeting before this, and I think everyone is related with information, good information. But I think as we dive into this more, we may be having some follow-up calls, and especially start planning what this looks like in terms of presenting. I know that I'll definitely have some questions and be resources.
Yes, we are here for you. That's, again, if anything, I wanted Lori to join us again, just so you could, even for the folks that are new here, can meet her virtually, because all three of us, and then Rachel included, all the speakers for this series are happy to be resources for you all. As we wrap up, I've got homework assignments for you, and they're really easy. They're help out with the Our Town grant if you can. Keep in touch with us. Share anything you're working on so we can help promote it, or we can help you at any stage of a project. If you have Facebook and would like to join the alumni group, please do. And finally, please, if you can, complete the evaluation form on the resources page, so you can help us improve this program for future cities. So, what was that?
What's the alumni group called?
It's called Community. Oh, let me pull it up before I tell you the wrong thing. So let me share my screen just real quick. If so, this is the resources page. You can get to it from there, and it's called the AFTA Community Scholars Alumni. Again, it'll be kind of small right now because you're the first cohort, but I'm going to have, you know, for every cohort we have, add folks. So eventually we can grow and have this really cool network of different cities across the state, community scholars alumni. So again, that Horse Cave project, that walking tour I shared with you, that's exactly how that developed. It was community scholars talking to each other and realizing that one community scholar was really good at XYZ. Another community scholar was really good at web design. So people pooled resources to make that happen. So that's kind of my larger vision for this network. You know, you've got a project in the meantime right now with Our Town Grant, but for the long term, you all are sort of landmark people in the community. So
I've been called a lot of things, but never a landmark.
Go drive until you see Judy and then turn right.
Yeah, that's what I said. I've been called a lot of things, but never a landmark.
Is anyone else able to find that on Facebook? I don't see it. AFTA Community Scholars Alumni. I don't find it.
let me send you, it might be a setting thing. I'll fiddle with that tonight and make sure in case it might be, because it's a private group, it should be visible, but we can send the link out to you all too. You should be able to join if you click on the link directly from the Facebook page.
Private but not secret. We should be able to see it, but I don't see it.
Have you gone through the resource page?
I just don't have it pulled up right now.
Okay.
I have looked through it, yes.
But I'll fiddle with that and make sure that you all can search it too. So thank you all.
Thank you.
You're troopers. You've given us quite a bit of your time. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
See you, Judy.
Enjoyed it.
Give us a holler.
Yes.